There are roughly 6.9 million Bitcoins sitting on the blockchain right now with their front doors wide open. No lock, no protection, just a public key exposed to the world, waiting for the day a quantum computer becomes powerful enough to walk right in, derive the private key, and drain every single wallet. That day used to be called theoretical, a distant problem for future engineers to solve. Something you dismissed at dinner parties with a casual wave and the words, "By the time that happens, we will have fixed it." But in 2026, something shifted. An independent researcher using nothing more than a publicly accessible, cloud-based quantum computer broke an elliptic curve cryptography key and collected a 1 Bitcoin bounty for doing it. Then Google published a paper suggesting that the number of qubits needed to crack Bitcoin's core. Encryption is far lower than anyone previously estimated. Then Bitcoin developers proposed a measure so dramatic, so unprecedented in the history of the world's most decentralized network, that it sent the entire crypto community into a heated debate that is still raging today. This is not a story about some distant future threat. This is a story about right now, about the mathematics protecting trillions of dollars in digital assets, and about the race between quantum computers and the people trying to build defenses fast enough to matter. To understand why this story matters so deeply, you need to understand how Bitcoin actually protects your money, because most people who own Bitcoin have no idea how the security underneath it actually works. When you create a Bitcoin wallet, you get two things. You get a private key, which is a secret number that only you are supposed to know, and you get a public key, which is derived from that private key through a mathematical operation and is shared openly with the world. The relationship between the private key and the public key is built on a branch of mathematics called elliptic curve cryptography. The security of that system rests on one fundamental assumption, that it is easy to go from a private key to a public key, but it is effectively impossible to go in reverse. You can take a private key and compute a public key in milliseconds, but taking a public key and working backward to find the private key would take a classical computer longer than the age of the universe. That mathematical difficulty is what makes Bitcoin secure. It is what makes it possible to share your public key and your wallet address with the entire world without anyone being able to steal your funds. And it is exactly what quantum computers threaten to destroy. If you did not know that, like and subscribe right now, because what comes next is going to change the way you think about every digital asset you own. The specific mathematical problem that protects Bitcoin is called the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem. It is a calculation involving points on a geometric curve, and the relationship between those points, when combined with the rules of modular arithmetic, creates a one-way function that classical computers cannot reverse in any practical amount of time. Bitcoin specifically uses a curve called SECP256K1, and it uses 256-bit keys, meaning the space of possible private keys is 2 to the power of 256. That is a number with 77 digits. A classical computer trying to brute force a 256-bit key by trying every possible value would need computational resources so enormous that the exercise is completely meaningless in practical terms. This is why Bitcoin has worked as a secure system for over 15 years. The mathematics underneath it is genuinely hard. There has been no known classical algorithm that can crack it efficiently. But quantum computers do not use classical algorithms. And in 1994, a mathematician named Peter Shor proved that a quantum computer running what is now called Shor's algorithm could solve the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem exponentially faster than any classical approach. On paper, the math has been broken for 30 years. The only question was always whether anyone could build a quantum computer powerful enough to actually run Shor's algorithm at the scale needed to attack 256-bit keys. Until very recently, that question had a comfortable answer. The machines did not exist and would not exist for a very long time. That comfortable answer is now under serious pressure. In September of 2025, an engineer named Steve Tippeconic made history in a small but significant way. He used publicly accessible IBM quantum hardware to break a 6-bit elliptic curve cryptography key using Shor's algorithm. 6 bits is nowhere near 256 bits. The practical significance was minimal, but the conceptual significance was enormous, because it was the first time anyone had publicly demonstrated a real quantum attack on the class of cryptography that protects Bitcoin using actual quantum hardware rather than just theory or simulation. It proved that the gap between theory and experiment had closed at least a little. Then, in April of 2026, an independent researcher named Giancarlo Lelli went further. Lelli implemented a 2-register variant of Shor's algorithm on IBM quantum cloud hardware, specifically targeting elliptic curves of the form used in Bitcoin's SECP256K1 standard. He ran his quantum circuit across multiple IBM processors and broke a 15-bit elliptic curve key, earning the one Bitcoin Q-Day prize offered by a quantum security research organization called Project 11 for the largest public demonstration of this kind of attack. That 15-bit result represented a 512-fold increase in the scale of the attack compared to what had been publicly demonstrated just 7 months earlier. Project 11's CEO described the significance clearly. The resource requirements for this type of attack keep dropping, and the barrier to running it, in practice, is dropping with them. Now, here's where honest context matters and where the story gets more complicated than the headlines suggest. A 15-bit key is not a 256-bit key. The distance between them is not linear. It is exponential. Going from 15 bits to 256 bits represents a factor of 2 to the power of 241 in computational difficulty. That is a number so incomprehensibly large that writing it out would take most of this video. Bitcoin is not in danger today. The quantum computer capable of breaking a 256-bit key does not exist and is not expected to exist in the immediate future. Within hours of the Q-Day prize being awarded, Bitcoin developers and cryptographers pushed back hard. Former Bitcoin Core maintainer Jonas Schnelli published analysis showing that Lely's quantum circuit produced output that was statistically indistinguishable from repeated coin flips, meaning the quantum hardware contributed essentially nothing to the result, and the answer was recovered classically. Some experts concluded that the quantum computer added no meaningful computational advantage, and that the result was more of a proof of concept about running quantum circuits on real hardware than a genuine demonstration of quantum supremacy over elliptic curve cryptography. These criticisms are real, and they matter. But they do not change the most important trend in this story, which is the direction of travel. Like and subscribe right now, because the direction of travel is what determines whether your Bitcoin is safe in 5 years. The most alarming development in 2026 did not come from a prize competition or a single researcher with a quantum computer in the cloud. It came from Google. In early 2026, research teams at Google Quantum AI published findings that fundamentally shifted the landscape for how people think about when quantum computers might become a genuine threat to Bitcoin. Previous estimates had suggested that breaking 256-bit elliptic curve cryptography would require millions of physical qubits. The Google research suggested that number could be dramatically lower, potentially under 500,000 physical qubits, with runtimes measured not in years or decades, but in minutes on a sufficiently capable machine. A separate paper from Caltech and a company called Oratomic went even further, suggesting that with optimized neutral atom quantum architectures, the resource requirements could potentially drop as low as around 10,000 qubits. These estimates are still theoretical and based on architectures that do not yet exist at the required scale, but they represent a dramatic compression of the timeline and a dramatic reduction in the assumed barrier to entry. When the resource requirement drops from millions of qubits to hundreds of thousands of qubits, the threat moves from science fiction to engineering challenge. And engineering challenges, given enough money and time and competition, tend to get solved. The implications for Bitcoin go beyond abstract cryptography because of a structural feature of how the Bitcoin blockchain works that most holders have never thought about. When you send Bitcoin from one address to another, your public key becomes visible on the blockchain permanently. It is there forever, available for anyone to see and analyze. This means that any Bitcoin in an address that has ever been used to send funds has its public key exposed on the public ledger right now. As of March 1st, 2026, over 34% of all Bitcoin in existence has had its public key exposed on-chain. That is somewhere between 6.5 and 6.9 million Bitcoin. It includes early format addresses called pay-to-public key addresses used in Bitcoin's earliest years, where the public key was exposed from the very beginning as part of how the transaction format worked. And here is the detail that stopped the Bitcoin community cold. Among those ancient pay-to-public key addresses sit roughly 1.7 million Bitcoin in wallets that have never moved, whose public keys have been visible on the blockchain for over 15 years, and which are widely believed to belong to Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. At current valuations, those coins are worth approximately $74 billion. Those coins are already exposed. The moment a quantum computer powerful enough to run Shor's algorithm at the necessary scale becomes operational, those coins do not need to be attacked in real time. They can be targeted using data that has been publicly available for years. This is the scenario that pushed Bitcoin developers to take action in 2026, and what they proposed is arguably the most radical and controversial thing ever seriously debated in the history of the Bitcoin network. In February of 2026, a proposal called BIP 360 was published and merged into Bitcoin's official development repository. BIP 360 introduced a brand new type of Bitcoin address designed to be quantum resistant from the ground up. The technical name for it is pay to Merkle root, and it works like taproot addresses that Bitcoin users may already be familiar with, except that it removes the cryptographic component that quantum computers could theoretically exploit. BIP 360 is primarily forward-looking. It protects new coins created in the new address format. It does not fix the problem of the coins that have already been exposed. That is where BIP 361 comes in, and where the debate explodes. Like and subscribe, because this part is where Bitcoin's future gets genuinely uncertain. BIP 361, formerly titled Post-Quantum Migration and Legacy Signature Sunset, was published on April 14, 2026. It was authored by Jameson Lopp, a well-known professional cypherpunk and longtime Bitcoin developer, along with 5 co-authors. The proposal is structured in 3 phases. Phase A, which would take effect 3 years after the proposal is activated, would prohibit sending new Bitcoin to the old vulnerable address types. Holders could still spend from those addresses, but could no longer receive new funds into them. Phase B, which would take effect 5 years after activation, would completely invalidate the old ecdsa and Schnorr signature types, effectively freezing any Bitcoin that had not been migrated to a quantum-resistant address by that point. Phase C, which is still being researched and is not fully defined, proposes a potential recovery mechanism using zero-knowledge proofs that might allow legitimate coin holders to prove they own frozen coins without exposing the cryptographic keys that would make those coins vulnerable. Even Jameson Lopp himself acknowledged publicly that this proposal is painful. He wrote on social media that he does not like this proposal, but that he dislikes the alternative even more. The alternative he is worried about is a quantum attacker draining billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin from exposed wallets before anyone can stop it. BIP 361 makes the argument that if you wait until the threat is real before acting, you have already lost. Because coordinating the entire Bitcoin ecosystem, including all the wallets, all the exchanges, all the custodians, and all the miners, historically takes years. The longer migration is postponed, the harder coordination becomes. The proposal even invokes the logic of Satoshi Nakamoto's original white paper, which noted that lost coins simply make the remaining supply more valuable, essentially a donation to everyone. BIP 361 flips that logic for the quantum age. Coins stolen by a quantum computer would devalue everyone's Bitcoin, making them a theft from everyone rather than a gift. The proposal also points out something genuinely chilling about the nature of a quantum attack. Victims may not even know it is happening. A sophisticated quantum attacker could derive private keys from exposed public keys and then wait, transferring funds quietly over weeks or months, bleeding out wallets without triggering the kind of sudden dramatic event that would alert chain watchers and prompt an emergency response. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the damage could be done. But the Bitcoin community's reaction to BIP 361 has been overwhelmingly and sometimes furiously negative. Critics within the developer community and the broader ecosystem have raised objections that strike at the fundamental philosophy of what Bitcoin is supposed to be. The most visceral objection involves Satoshi Nakamoto's coins. Those coins have never moved. Their owner, whoever they are, wherever they are, whether live or dead or simply absent, has not chosen to move them. BIP 361 would effectively give those coins a deadline: migrate or be frozen. To many in the Bitcoin community, this feels indistinguishable from confiscation. It feels like precisely the kind of centralized, authority-imposed intervention that Bitcoin was designed to make impossible. One commenter on Reddit captured the sentiment with, "If you fork a frozen wallet to hedge investment risk, Bitcoin is no longer Bitcoin." The co-author of BIP 360 and Mara protocol engineer Hunter Beast disagrees, arguing that the time frame to act may be as short as 3 years, and that the network cannot afford to wait for consensus to form at the pace that Bitcoin governance typically operates. Coinbase and BlackRock have both flagged quantum computing as a material risk in regulatory filings, adding institutional weight to the urgency argument. The broader cryptographic world is also not standing still. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which sets encryption standards for the United States government, finalized 3 post-quantum cryptographic standards in 2024. These include ML-Chem for general encryption, ML-DSA for digital signatures, and SLH-DSA for hash-based signatures. Google has publicly committed to completing its own migration to post-quantum cryptography by 2029. The Ethereum Foundation has established a dedicated post-quantum team and has begun planning its own transition, with Ethereum's co-founder Vitalik Buterin specifically identifying validator signatures, wallet signatures, and zero-knowledge proof systems as areas that need quantum-resistant upgrades. The entire digital security ecosystem is moving simultaneously, not because quantum computers have already broken anything, but because the engineering gap is closing fast enough that waiting until the last minute is no longer considered an acceptable risk management strategy by anyone who understands the numbers. What makes this moment so historically significant is that Bitcoin has never faced a threat quite like this one. Previous security threats to Bitcoin involve things like 51% attacks, which require capturing a majority of the network's mining hash rate, or software vulnerabilities that could be patched with an update, or social engineering attacks on individual users. Those threats are serious, but they are containable. A cryptographically relevant quantum computer running Shor's algorithm against Bitcoins. Estimates put a cryptographically relevant quantum computer as potentially arriving between 2027 and 2030. Bitcoin security researcher Justin Drake publicly estimated a 10% chance that a quantum computer can recover a Bitcoin private key from an exposed public key by 2032. 10% sounds small. But when the downside scenario involves trillions of dollars in digital assets and the potential destruction of confidence in the world's largest cryptocurrency, 10% is not a number any serious person should dismiss. So where does this leave someone who holds Bitcoin today? The first thing to understand is that if your Bitcoin is in a modern wallet that uses current best practices for address generation, specifically if your wallet creates a have already been exposed, either through spending or through early address formats, if you have never sent Bitcoin from an address, your public key is not exposed, and a quantum attacker would first need to break a different type of cryptographic problem to target you, one that even optimistic quantum timelines suggest is much harder. The second thing to understand is that the Bitcoin developer community, despite being famously slow to change, is now actively working on solutions. BIP 360 and BIP 361 are the opening moves in what will be a years-long upgrade process. Whether those specific proposals are adopted in their current form or replaced by alternatives is less important than the fact that the conversation has started and the urgency is now widely recognized. The third and most important thing to understand is that this story is not finished. The race between quantum computers and quantum-resistant cryptography is happening in real time, and the outcome is not predetermined. Quantum computers are advancing faster than most people expected, but the cryptographic defenses are advancing too. NIST has standards, Bitcoin has proposals, Ethereum has a team dedicated to the problem. Google, Microsoft, IBM, and governments around the world are all investing in post-quantum security because they know that the entire digital infrastructure of modern civilization runs on the same class of mathematics that is now under quantum threat. The question is not whether Bitcoin will be forced to upgrade. It will be. The question is whether it will upgrade fast enough in a decentralized network where no single authority can force anyone to do anything before a quantum computer, powerful enough to make the decision for everyone, actually exists. History suggests that decentralized systems move slowly. Physics suggests that quantum computers are moving fast. What happens when those two trajectories collide is one of the most consequential open questions in technology today. If this video opened your eyes to a threat that most Bitcoin holders have never seriously thought about, hit that like button right now and make sure you subscribe, because this story is going to keep developing and every update matters more than the last. The breakthrough has happened. The clock is ticking. The question now is whether Bitcoin moves fast enough to survive what is coming. The debate happening inside the Bitcoin developer community right now reflects a tension that goes far deeper than technical disagreements about cryptographic timelines. It is a philosophical conflict between two completely different visions of what Bitcoin is supposed to be. On one side are the people who believe Bitcoin is primarily a tool for financial sovereignty, a system where no authority can freeze, confiscate, or otherwise interfere with your money regardless of the circumstances. On the other side are the people who believe Bitcoin is primarily a long-term store of value, and that protecting the integrity and purchasing power of the entire network is worth accepting difficult trade-offs, including forcing upgrades that some participants may not want or may not be able to execute in time. BIP 361 lands squarely in the middle of that conflict, and the fact that it was written by someone like Jameson Lopp, who has spent his entire career advocating for individual financial sovereignty, tells you something important about the severity of what the quantum threat represents to people who understand it deeply. There's also a timing dimension to this problem that rarely gets discussed in the popular coverage of quantum computing. Most people assume that quantum computers will announce their arrival with a dramatic public demonstration, the way that Google announced quantum supremacy with its Sycamore processor in 2019. They assume that there will be warning signs, that they know when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists before anyone uses it to steal Bitcoin. But BIP 361 itself raises the unsettling possibility that this assumption may be wrong. A nation-state with access to a sufficiently powerful quantum computer would have every incentive to keep that fact secret. The value of being able to silently drain any exposed Bitcoin wallet is enormous, and a sophisticated actor would not announce the capability before exploiting it. They would compute private keys quietly, wait, and then move funds in patterns designed to evade detection for as long as possible. By the time the pattern was recognized, hundreds of thousands or millions of Bitcoin could already be gone. This is not a paranoid fantasy. It is a straightforward application of how strategic. This is why the developers pushing BIP 361 argue that waiting for evidence of the threat before acting is not a cautious strategy. It is a catastrophically risky one. The time to build a new roof is before the storm arrives, not during it. And in a decentralized network without any central authority to mandate emergency changes, the coordination problem makes acting after the fact even could be destroyed. The damage might be done before any upgrade could be deployed and adopted widely enough to matter. This is the nightmare scenario that BIP 361 is trying to prevent, and it is why its author wrote that he dislikes the proposal, but dislikes the alternative even more. What happens next in this story depends on several variables that are genuinely uncertain. It depends on how fast quantum computers actually improve, which is a hardware and engineering question that no one can answer with confidence. It depends on whether the Bitcoin community can reach consensus on a migration path quickly enough, which is a governance question with no guaranteed answer, given how slowly and contentiously Bitcoin has historically changed. It depends on whether post-quantum cryptographic standards prove to be as secure as their designers believe, which is a mathematical question that will be stress tested over the coming years. And it depends on whether the institutions that hold Bitcoin, the exchanges, the custodians, the funds, move quickly enough to protect their customers, even if individual wallet holders are slow to act. All of these threads are in motion simultaneously, and the outcome of their interaction will determine whether the story of quantum computing and Bitcoin ends with a seamless upgrade or with one of the largest financial disruptions in the history of digital assets. What is already clear is that 2026 has permanently changed the conversation. For years, quantum computing was something the Bitcoin community could wave away with a confident prediction that defenses would arrive before the threat did. That confidence is no longer available. The breakthroughs have happened. The papers have been published. The prize has been awarded. The proposals are on the table. The race is real. And every person who holds digital assets deserves to understand exactly what is at stake and exactly how much time may or may not remain to act.